Good afternoon, everyone. This is Audrey Russo, President and CEO of the Pittsburgh Technology Council, welcoming everyone to today's Business as Usual. I'm also joined by Jonathan Kirsting. He's Vice President of all things media and marketing and on the team of the Tech Council. And by the way, he's just celebrated 23 years with the Tech Council, so he knows a lot about what's been happening in the ecosystem. And thrilled to have all of you here. I would like to just give a shout out to Huntington Bank for their long-standing partnership and belief in our work. If you don't know anything about them, go to their website and you'll find out all the things that they do and how they support both small and large businesses, as well as their civic mindedness in our community. So today is our 131st session of Business as Usual, which we launched at the beginning of the pandemic to help keep the community connected and informed and to showcase some of the world-changing innovation that is occurring right here in Pittsburgh. So it's been fun, it's exciting, and I actually thought that we would only do this for 2 weeks. Little did I know that we're now entering our third season. We just started fall, so it's pretty crazy, and we're trying to provide as much relevance as possible and keep the community tethered. So we have muted your microphones just to make sure that there's no sound in the background to interrupt our guest. And then we also have the chat session enabled. Jonathan's going to keep his eyes peeled on that to make sure that we have some time to talk with our guest and answer some questions. So today's program, and I'd like to welcome Michael Bozik. He is the president and CEO of Knopp Biosciences. And we just realized that we've known Mike for about a dozen years. And I'm very excited to do a deep dive with him because I think you're going to be really proud to hear about the work that they have been, just diligently working on. It's pretty amazing. So welcome, Mike. Welcome to BAU. And before we talk about Knopp, let's just sort of set the stage and talk about who is Mike. A little bit about your background, because it's really interesting. And I think it will be inspiring for others to hear about your own professional journey.
Oh, thanks, Audrey, and thanks to Pittsburgh Technology Council for the invitation. It's a great opportunity. So happy to give you the thumbnail sketch. I am a physician by training. I actually was trained in neurology and neuro-oncology at the University of Pittsburgh in the Cancer Institute here, and was a academic physician scientist, had a lab, directed the Brain Tumor Center at the Cancer Institute, and have sort of always been oriented toward trying to develop treatments that are difference makers. That led me to leave the university in 1998 to head up the CNS, the neuroscience clinical development group at Bristol Myers Squibb, where I spent the next 7 years in various roles, and made my way back to Pittsburgh when I met the founders of Knopp, Tom Petzinger and Greg Hebrank. Knopp was, company number 4 or 5 out of Tom's launch site group, and it was a natural fit for me because the focus was on developing a solution initially for a really important medical disease where there's high unmet need, which is Lou Gehrig's disease. So, delighted to have made my way back to Pittsburgh. My wife, who's from Pittsburgh, was even more delighted to have made her way back to Pittsburgh. So, happy to be here.
So, how did you sort of make this kind of pivot, like to become an entrepreneur?
Yeah. So, interestingly, when I was at Bristol Myers Squibb, my initial role heading up the neuroscience clinical development group morphed, and I ended up in a different role heading up R&D at our specialty pharma business. And during that transition, they actually decided to shelve a lot of the neuroscience programs, including one that is akin to what we're working on today at Knopp. And the head of CNS marketing and the head of CNS science and I got together and we said, we should try to spin out a company and do this. And so we had an internal plan at Bristol Myers Squibb, had some funding. The short version is that we got close but it was decided it wasn't a good corporate move, and but that sort of gave me an exposure to what it would be like to take the lessons learned that you get from really great institutions like the University of Pittsburgh or Bristol Myers Squibb, and apply your lessons learned, your best practices in an environment where you don't have the encumbrances that also come from large institutions.
Well, good. I mean, not a lot of people make that kind of transition so successfully. So, just wanted to peek inside to understand. Usually, scientists following a methodology, and then sort of the craziness and the iteration of entrepreneurship that doesn't necessarily follow the same path. So thank you for that. And tell us about the history of Knopp. What about some of the pivots that you've made along the way? Sort of take us through the journey.
Sure. So as I mentioned, Knopp was founded in 2004, and it was initially an ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease, diagnostics company. And Tom and Greg named the company Knopp Neurosciences at the time because the founder, or the patient who actually supported the initial research, was a man named a local Pittsburgh entrepreneur named Walter Knopp. They named the company after Walter because his gift supported the initiating technology that was licensed around this diagnostic technique. That led to a conversation with an investigator at the University of Virginia, Jim Bennett, who had a drug that potentially could be used to treat dexpramipexole. That's when I got involved. I did the diligence on the drug. It seemed to be promising. The brass ring that I have always been looking for personally, professionally, is a drug that's a difference maker. And this had the potential to do that. We thought we could that was sort of the first major shift in sort of business strategy. And we moved from a diagnostics company to a therapeutics company. We raised between 2006 and 2009 in two series of fundraisers, $10 million in the Series A, $30 million in the Series B. That funded the development of dexpramipexole as an ALS therapeutic through phase 1 in 2007, through phase 2 in 2008 and 2009, and to a large license with Biogen IDEC in 2010, who took over responsibility for the phase 3 study. That was an important point in the company history, because we used the proceeds from that to fund a second program that I'll talk about today, that is sort of reaching finally the maturity stage, which is our neuroscience ion channels focused, epilepsy focused program. Unfortunately, in Biogen's hands between 2010 and 2013, they didn't replicate the ALS result. We recovered the rights to dexpramipexole, and then this produced the next major focus. One, we had to endure what in many instances is a catastrophic phase 3 failure. We have some loyal investors who supported our ability to pivot the company to an observation that we saw, which is dexpramipexole turns out to be a drug that lowers or depletes a cell called the eosinophil. And anybody that's watching TVs these days might have noticed commercials about, do you know what your eosinophil is? And it's a white blood cell that contributes to inflammation, and in particular asthma exacerbations. So when that knowledge sort of emerged between 2007 and 2013, when we were developing dexpramipexole, we pivoted the company and have been exploring dexpramipexole's potential as a treatment for eosinophilic disorder.
So that's this announcement about the completion of the enrollment in phase 2? Is that what that?
Exactly, yeah. So the last week we announced that we completed enrollment in a phase 2 asthma study. When we finished, or when we got the rights to dexpramipexole back from Biogen IDEC, we needed to demonstrate that the eosinophil lowering we had seen in ALS patients who have normal levels of eosinophils, it actually is relevant in patients who have high levels of eosinophils. So we have done 2 proof of concept studies before we started this asthma study. And the proof of concept studies were in a condition called hypereosinophilic syndrome, which is sort of a non-malignant eosinophilic leukemia. It's a proliferation of cells. It's a bad disease. It's an orphan disease with very high levels of eosinophils and only corticosteroids as a treatment. And the other one was sinusitis with nasal polyps. These are sort of these polyps fill your nose. You can't breathe. They feel congested, and they're filled with eosinophils. And what we showed in both of those studies is that the profound eosinophil lowering that we saw in ALS actually occurs in these patients as well. And these we published the results of these studies. And in HES, this hypereosinophilic syndrome, we actually had some patients that went into complete disease remission. So we know it's an active drug lowering eosinophils. We've seen some clinical evidence of early evidence of clinical benefit, and that led us to start this asthma study a year ago. We've completed enrollment, and we expect to have the top line results early in 2020.
Wow. So what I always find fascinating is, first of all, what is the target population? I mean, what's the number? You know, give us an example of how many people are affected by these conditions.
Yeah. Well, 2 comments. The short answer to your question about how many people are affected, about half the people with asthma, which is 25 million in the US, 25, 26 million, have an eosinophilic type of asthma. And your question actually is a really important one as we think about drug development in 2020 versus 1995 when I was at the Cancer Institute, where we really had not fully unlocked the power of the human genome and understanding the genetics of medicine, and understanding sort of the fact that when we say something like asthma is not, we think of it as one disease. It's actually many diseases. And the eosinophilic endotype is one subset of that. Of the patients that have that, about 1 million patients have severe asthma, meaning they're at high risk for these asthma exacerbations. They're on inhaled corticosteroids and a long-acting beta agonist. And that's along with patients with moderate disease, which is another 2 million. So there are about 3 million patients that really need a solution to this eosinophilic component of their asthma.
And so would it have applicability to people who don't have that, but they have asthma?
We don't know, but it's less likely. Okay. The drug that we're developing, dexpramipexole, is an oral drug in contrast to every other approved treatment for the eosinophilic phenotype of the disease. But none of those drugs directly relax smooth muscle. So, the inhaler that you take relaxes the smooth muscle, the airways dilate, and you can breathe more easily. They have an indirect effect by reducing inflammation and have a modest effect on relaxing the airway, but they make it less predisposed to sort of tightening up and giving an asthma attack. So if you don't have that driver of inflammation that's the eosinophil, we don't have any reason to believe that it would be beneficial in non.
Okay. And anything that's happening with COVID in terms of the impact of people who are in this condition? Because I would think that. Yeah,
great question. So, like the PTC, who has been now is in their 3rd season of business as usual.
Right.
It was anything but business as usual for us in the middle of the pandemic. And so we actually, the study which started in September of 2019, we suspended enrollment in the middle of March and resumed at the end of May, early June. So it did slow us down. Fortunately, the patients that were in the study, we were able to keep in the study, and there's patients with certain pre-existing conditions are more vulnerable to COVID, and certainly asthma or any respiratory disease is one of those. So, we'd like to think that if we actually are improving lung function and reducing the risk of these asthma attacks, that the being on the drug may have conferred some benefit. We were able to resume the study very along with a lot of other assumption of activities in June, and we completed enrollment as we announced last week.
Wow, it's good. I'm glad to hear that they're continuing, that didn't hamper your journey, because for many it has. So that's great. So beyond the work in asthma, Knopp has been pursuing novel drug treatments to multiple other immunological and neurological diseases. So can you describe some of that? Can you talk about any of that?
Sure. So on the immunology side, dexamethasone is a unique drug, but it's really what we call a platform in a product. So its potential to be directed to inflammatory disorders is not limited to asthma. So the eosinophil plays a role in a wide variety of diseases, like this hypereosinophilic syndrome. There's a condition that's become very prevalent called eosinophilic esophagitis, which is very troublesome, and there may be some people on the broadcast today that are affected by it. But it's a condition where you have pain, swallowing, and is a very debilitating condition. There are other GI conditions. There are another condition, atopic dermatitis or eczema, is associated with eosinophilic infiltration of the skin. So we will be exploring, after this asthma study, our plan is to broaden out the potential use of dexamethasone and Paxil in a host of these immunologic disorders. At our heart, and in terms of our the sort of the expertise of the company, we really are a neuroscience company. We were founded as a neuroscience company around Lou Gehrig's disease. Our chief scientific officer headed up the ion channels program at Bristol Myers Squibb, and that's why in 2013 we introduced this second plank of our business, and which is it's called KV7. K for potassium, V for voltage gated, 7 for the seventh type of potassium channel that is this voltage gated channel. And we actually recruited a chemist from around the country. We recruited biologists from around the country, and we have our own sort of homegrown discovery program that now has yielded a drug candidate that we hope to be in clinical development with the second half of next year for a rare genetic pediatric epilepsy.
Wow. We're going to get to some of your people in a minute, but I want to just talk about, I just want everyone to understand that obviously this work is sophisticated. It takes a lot of high skills. You have a variety of people that work on your team. And how many people are working? Like, give us like a profile of what your team consists of.
Yeah, so we have 21 people working at Knopp now. About 12 of them are in the lab. So we have five full-time medicinal chemists. We have 5 full-time biologists, plus our chief scientific officer, and a sort of an informatics person. The data that you need to be able to collect, analyze, and interpret, is very sophisticated, and the sort of multiplexing of the tools that we use, it requires a lot of technology implementation.
Are you hiring at all?
We're not hiring currently, but we certainly had the plan gone according to script back in 2013. We had hoped actually to, of course, most importantly for the patients, have a drug that worked in Lou Gehrig's disease. But sort of looping back to the beginning of the conversation, one of the reasons I left Pittsburgh in 1998 to pursue a career in the biotech pharmaceutical industry was not because I wanted to leave Pittsburgh, where we have incredible healthcare and life sciences capabilities, but there really was not an ecosystem, a biotech ecosystem, and so part of the goal for us is to meet with success and to keep the company in Pittsburgh. I mean, Tom has lots of experiences here, but we were told very early in 2005 when we were licensing a drug by a local expert in this area. It's like, why would you want to do a life sciences company in Pittsburgh? You should take it to Boston. And we have a different point of view. And the goal would be to you really have to get a drug you really have to get a drug approved, and you have to have, obviously, in business, revenue. That's our goal. We aspire to become a company that can anchor itself, grow, and sort of be that. If we could be for Pittsburgh, as Genzyme was to Cambridge, which if you went to Cambridge
Right.
in the late 80s, early 90s, it looks like the south side of Pittsburgh, and today it's biotech centric.
Huh. That really back in the 80s or 90s?
Yeah. I mean, when Genzyme and Biogen, which are really the two anchor companies there, when Copaxone, not Copaxone, blanking on the name right now of Biogen, sort of their beta interferon, beta seron. It was just a bunch of empty warehouses, and today it's just
amazing.
Obviously, it's transformed that region.
What I think everyone needs to understand, if they don't know already, is that you can hear from Mike about the tenacity that it takes to do this kind of work. And, you're really in this for the long haul. And raising money is, a really integral part of the work that you do. Obviously, you can find grants here and there. Obviously, there are certainly, initiatives, but revenue generation doesn't come, quickly in this process. So can you sort of just tell us about, what's the climate like? I mean, even now, what's the climate like in terms of, raising money, being in life sciences, being in, pharma, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the climate in Pittsburgh versus the climate in Boston or the Bay Area.
Tell us, your view.
Yeah, so I mean, the climate in Pittsburgh is a challenge. Now we have been fortunate over the years to have our paid in capital at this point is over $100 million. So that's a reflection of the magnitude of the capital that's required to try to accomplish what we are trying to accomplish. Our investment has come from outside of Pittsburgh largely. We started out, of course, with some angel funding, but it's largely been outside of Pittsburgh. The environment for biotech, if you look at the amount of money that's going into biotech, it's unprecedented amounts of money, and it's large amounts of money. So there is capital that is out there. And at the end of the day, what we learned with the Biogen IDEC transaction is if you have a compelling story and a compelling product, you will get investment from that. And so we that occurred for us when we had the phase 2 ALS results. Again, sort of going back to what was announced at the time, the license that we signed with Biogen IDEC included a $90 million upfront, and that could have, we elected to do that license instead of raising the capital to do the phase 3 study ourselves. But if you have a product, either a strategic investor or some of these, the Orbimeds and the RA Capitals and the Wellingtons, they will invest when there's a compelling story. And what we hope at post the asthma study is that we will have a compelling story to tell.
Well, you're being a little too modest. It's not just the compelling story. It's the amassing of a team that people bet on, and they bet on leaders, and they bet. So it's a twofold bet. So, I mean, I know you weren't going to brag about that, but that's a very important piece of investment, right? It's the people.
And just maybe a follow on to that, we have been fortunate to be able to recruit some very experienced pharma talent, and that's very possible in Pittsburgh. And look, when I talk to my colleagues in Boston who are paying $120 per square foot for their lab space versus we're paying, there are certainly that we can do this in Pittsburgh. We can accomplish it in Pittsburgh. But to your point, we've got a great team. In addition to Tom and Greg, our chief scientific officer, Stephen Doretsky, spent the first 17 years of his career at Bristol Myers Squibb. The last 13, he's been here. And at Bristol Myers Squibb, as I mentioned, not only did he head up the ion channels discovery program, but he was actually the discoverer of the gene that is responsible, mutations to this gene are responsible for the pediatric epilepsy that we're pursuing. So it's that sort of both the level of scientific expertise that we've been able to recruit to Knopp, and also a nice sort of full story or full circle story. And then our chief commercial officer, Mark Creston, spent 30 years in big pharma. He launched a drug called Orencia at Bristol Myers Squibb. He headed up global immunology at J&J. And his last 5 years, he actually was at Cell, before he came to us, was at Celgene, heading up their I&I franchise. And he launched a drug called Otezla, which people may have seen in commercials for. It's the only oral drug in the psoriasis market. And we actually hope to replay that story in asthma, if you will. So our drug would be the only oral drug that would treat eosinophilic asthma. And we've been fortunate, as I said, to be able to convince people with large pharma experience that this is a good team to join, and that we're going somewhere important.
And that's what's important in terms of fundraising as well.
That's right.
Jonathan, there's just a question. You're not involved in the COVID-19 related research at UPMC, correct?
We are not.
Right, that's what I thought. So Jonathan, Dirk has a question, and I just think it's about clarity. So if you could just do that before we wrap up, I think that would be great. You're on mute. Okay, Jonathan, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yeah. So Dirk, Calp has a question here. It says, could you explain a bit about the immunological disease, autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, basically are when the immune system goes crazy and attacks the body, so inflammation becomes chronic as opposed to short-term healing process. How does this differ in the types of asthma that you mentioned?
Yeah, so it's unclear at this point whether eosinophilic asthma, what sort of triggers it as opposed to rheumatoid arthritis or psoriasis, although the pathophysiology of those are still being uncovered. I think one thing that is a distinction is that with rheumatoid arthritis and psoriasis, there is maybe a broader inclusion of the immune system. So there are lots of inflammation that's mediated not just by in those eosinophils play a modest role in psoriasis, less of a role in rheumatoid arthritis, but those are really sort of lymphocytic driven inflammations and sort of a broader repertoire of cells. So different cell type 1, and of course in rheumatoid arthritis and in psoriasis too, you get a lot of tissue damage and destruction. And in eosinophilic asthma, there's less of sort of a fibrotic component to the disease that you would see maybe in COPD or by analogy to rheumatoid arthritis.
Okay. So we have run at the end of our show, and I'd like to thank you. Is there anything else that you think that we should cover or you should mention? We've given the website out. You can follow what's happening with them via their website, and you could probably find a way to reach out to Michael if you're interested. But is there anything else, Michael, that you think is really important for us to know? I mean, you've been a leader in the community as well, so.
Well, I think that one, by supporting each other, and just a tip of the cap to you, Audrey, and the team at PTC, because this is important to Pittsburgh's future. I think that, and we're not alone in our efforts, and certainly, the University of Pittsburgh is making a big commitment to translational medicine. It's important that we succeed. So I think these types of forums and staying integrated and working with each other, sharing knowledge, sharing best practices, I think that's really important work so that we can get the first big win across the finish line and then celebrate more.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're absolutely busy. My hat's off to you and Knopp for all the work that you've done, the people that you've attracted here, and as I mentioned earlier, tenacity in terms of solving really hard problems for people. And we'll stay connected with you. So I want to thank you for joining us today. Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks the team at the PTC, and thank all of you for joining us. Really learned a lot today. And tomorrow we're going to be talking about Neighborhood 91. Neighborhood 91 is the additional neighborhood that is now erupting near the airport in Moon Township. So we're going to be talking about what's happening there. So thanks everyone, stay safe and keep connected with us, and we will try to do the same with you.
Awesome. Thanks, Audrey.